What's up, metalheads? Welcome to the Scrap Metal Podcast, the show for the misfits who've been listening to the same music since high school. I'm your host, John von Frankenstein, and joining me today is my metal thrashing mad co-host, Chris. Chris, I gotta ask you, man, how you feeling?
I gotta say, I'm feeling like a high roller.
High roller. Do you know when to fold him? Do you know when to run? Chris, I never took you for a gambling man. Does this feeling of being a high roller have anything to do with how you're keeping your heavy metal street cred?
It might have something to do with my heavy metal street cred. I recently got back from a trip to Las Vegas where I had a lot of fun.
Nice.
Lost a bunch of money, but I did go see the Vegas Golden Knights play a game. That was a lot of fun. You know, I am a big hockey fan. I'm an Islanders fan, but it was cool to see the Golden Knights take on the Blackhawks. They won, which was fun. They do a cool, thing before the show where there's the Golden Knight is fighting a guy who represents the other team. He's holding a flag, like a Blackhawks flag, and they get into a whole sword fight. Then they come out on the ice and they're projecting onto the ice icebergs and lava, and the Golden Knight is destroying the icebergs to kill the guy. It was a lot of fun. It was
That's
really
cool.
cool. It was really cool. But on the way to Las Vegas, I had an interesting experience at the airport. I am not a morning person. My day starts at noon, so waking up at 4 a.m. to get to the airport was not fun. So I'm sitting at the gate, very tired, looking forward to getting on the plane so I can hopefully sleep on the flight out to Vegas. And I have a gentleman walk up to me. He's got gauges in his ear, and I think he had some tattoos or whatever, but I am barely conscious. I am barely aware of my surroundings. And this dude comes up to me and he's like, "Oh, are you going to see Fish?" I look at him. I'm like, "No, I'm not." He's like, "Oh, cool shirt." And he walks away because I was wearing a shirt. It kind of looked like a tarot card, but it's the character of Molly Mock from Critical Role, which I've talked about before. And so he walks away, and my brother and my dad are "Dude, what was he saying?" He was asking if I was seeing Fish. I don't fucking know. So we get on the plane, and this dude gets on the plane, walks up to my dad. He's like, "Oh, are you going to see Fish?" My dad is like, "The fuck are you talking about?" "No, I'm not going to see Fish." It's like, "Oh, okay." And he keeps going. And I guess he just asked everyone on the plane if they were going to see Fish.
Yeah.
And so he sits down and we take off. We're on our way and we finally land. And as soon as the seatbelt light turns off, the Fish dude comes sprinting down the aisle to get off the plane right away. He hits my brother with his backpack and is yelling, "Oh, sorry, dude," as he's running off the plane.
Jesus Christ.
And I'm like, fuck, is Fish playing tonight? It's clearly he's a big Fish fan.
Yeah.
I hope he doesn't miss the show. But there's something going on with this dude. Then I find out they weren't even playing that day. They were playing a few dates at the Sphere, but the shows didn't even start until 2 or 3 days later. So I don't know what he was in such a rush to get to.
You had to prepare, man. It's Fish.
But yeah, it was so funny. And then afterwards, my brother and my dad are both "The fuck is that guy? Is he talking about fishing?" I'm "No, he's talking about the band Fish," which is this was the world's most normal Fish fan.
Yeah.
This is the world we live in.
That's saying a lot. That's saying a lot. Not only did he make his way through your whole entire family tree asking them if they were going to the concert, but he had to get off that plane in that exact moment because if he didn't time his trip out the right way, he's going to miss the peak as soon as they come out. So that's why he was in such a rush to get off that fucking plane.
Clearly. It's because I every time I fly, I have to make the same joke about opening the window and being like, "There's someone on the wing. Something on the wing." And maybe he saw that creature that William Shatner saw on the wing.
That's what he was afraid of.
And that's what he was afraid of. And he's like, "I need to get the fuck off of this plane."
If I stick around and talk to this thing, I'm going to miss my fucking Fish show.
Unless he's going to see Fish, he should have asked the monster on the wing if he was going to see Fish.
Yeah, seriously. I would have loved that. They would have made such good friends in the pit together. In the pit. Yeah, at a Fish show.
Yeah.
Do they have pits at Fish shows?
I don't
Or is it more like a
fucking know.
drum circle, probably?
I'm assuming it's a bunch of people walking in circles, tripping their balls off. Like that's what I'm imagining.
Oh my God. It's a shame. It's a shame that lovely Fish fan made his way out of your life I think too soon. I think he had more to say to you, more to share with you, more experiences that he could have told you about that he's had, asking other people on other flights if they're going to see Fish. So I think you would have, maybe learned something from him if you spent a little bit more time with him. But that's a pretty common thing in the world of rock and metal. We often have people who leave us far too soon. And it's no joking matter. Not at all. Definitely don't want to make it sound like we're taking it lightly. But I thought that this would be a cool episode to jump into to kind of honor some of those people that have left the music world too soon. So today we're talking about artists who were just gone before their time, gone before they had an opportunity to make the impact that we know they would have made on the world of rock and heavy metal. Chris, I don't want this episode to be a downer. I want it to be more of a celebration. How are we going to celebrate these artists who've left us too soon?
I think we've had similar conversations in the past. I think in our Songs to Rot To episode, where we talk about how, yes, the loss of someone, the death of someone, going to a funeral, it can be a downer and a real bummer. But you also need to be able to celebrate these people. And I think for some of the folks we're going to be talking about today, they made an impact in music, and we have their music to listen to and celebrate them. And yes, it's very sad that their lives were cut short and that they didn't get to create all the music that they probably would have. But the fact that even in the short time that they were with us, that they were able to create music and have this impact, it's nice to be able to celebrate that. And it's nice to be able to say, kind of prove that point that, yeah, this person still had a lot to offer to the world as a person, as a musician, as a songwriter. And so it's sad and it's a challenge to talk about, but at the same time, I think if we can look at it as celebrating these artists and saying, these are the things that they gave us, the gift they gave us was their music, and we're going to celebrate their life by continuing to listen to their music, because luckily we live in a time where we can cherish this music, and the music still exists, and it's we can still hear this person's voice, this person's playing, we can still hear it, and we can celebrate them and honor them. And so I'm very excited to have this discussion in that way and point out artists that are just left such an impact, and in some ways maybe left a void in certain styles of music.
For sure. I love that you mention being able to celebrate them although they're no longer with us, and reminding ourselves that we do still have the music. And you hear it said so often that especially with artists with Jimi Hendrix, he was not as big of a success. He was not as impactful as he was. It almost took his death for him to be immortalized in the way that he was, because that's when his records really started selling. And it's such an odd thing to think it takes the loss of someone for their art to truly be appreciated. And I think that's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? You can look at it as, oh, it took this person dying for anyone to actually give their music the time of day and for them to listen to it. But at the same time, it might be the news surrounding someone's death that makes a listener aware of who this is.
Yeah.
You're seeing the accolades that people are giving this artist. You're seeing everyone mourning and saying their piece about the impact that this artist had on their lives. And so now, out of curiosity, you go and you look back and maybe you find a new favorite artist that you wouldn't have known, unfortunately, until their passing. So I think it can be looked at in those two different ways, and I think as long as we're celebrating and honoring their memories, that's what's most important. You know, I mentioned someone like Hendrix. I think that we had like a lot of legends, Randy Rhoads as well, where it's like, you know, these guys just had so much to offer, and you hear stories about, oh, this, you know, he had this project lined up and he was going to go off and he was going to leave this band and he was going to go out and write classical music. You hear that said a lot of times with Cliff Burton too.
Yeah.
You know, like, oh, he had plans to maybe do more progressive music and bringing in more of those classical influences. And who knows what these people would have gone on to make. And that's probably the hardest thing to deal with is the what if. What if we still had them around? And, you know, right off the bat, I want to bring up singer Riley Gale, frontman of the band Power Trip. This is a perfect example of someone that unfortunately it took for me to hear his name when everyone was announcing his passing, for me to become aware of who Power Trip and who Riley was. So, like, once I heard about this passing and they were talking about it constantly on Sirius XM and I saw people posting about it, you know, I looked them up and I'm like, fuck. I missed out on a really great, you know, how many concerts that I could have attended. And like, that really sucks. It sucks to be left with that feeling of like, fuck, I could have seen this guy live. Like, what a fucking performer.
Yeah.
But we live in an age, like you mentioned, where I can go on YouTube and watch some live performances with Riley. I can listen to their music. And that's the really special part. Power Trip is such an awesome band. And Riley's voice, he had this real aggression of that early thrash, like very early Hetfield kind of attitude to his voice, you know, very brash and in your face. And I really love that. Like, I was not expecting that when I threw them on because a lot of it sounded very retro. You know, we talk about how like these modern thrash metal bands will oftentimes throw a bunch of reverb on the drums and stuff to make it sound like those earlier thrash albums. But then his voice comes out and it's like immediately stands out in this power that he had behind him. So yeah, I definitely want to make sure that I mentioned Riley right off the bat. And, you know, I don't necessarily want to start to get into the ways that these artists left us because that doesn't really matter. I don't want to linger on that sort of stuff. It's more so honoring what they did while they were here with us.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's an important way to look at it is because you have the 27 Club, all those musicians and rock stars that died at the age of 27, and whether it's drugs, alcohol, suicides, whatever it is, you know, we don't want to have that discussion. The discussion is about someone that was taken from us however they were and the music that they were able to create until that point.
Yeah.
And so that's a great way to talk about that and say that, we're not trying to linger on what happened in this person's personal life. We want to talk about the contributions they made to the world of music.
Oh, yeah. I mean, like, you look at Riley's passing, and that made me aware of this whole, you know, like, modern crossover thrash genre of music that now I've taken the time to really invest in and listen to. And, you know, I know that you are a fan of Power Trip as well. And, you know, we've had an opportunity now to discuss these artists on this very show. You know, again, it sucks that it takes that to happen, but it's something that we can look at it in a positive light and say like, all right, cool. At least now we have this. Who's another artist that you think deserves some celebration, some highlighting?
So similar to your experience with Power Trip, when I was in high school, I think I've mentioned this before, my dad worked for a CD and book distributor, and we would go to the bookstore and buy CDs, or he would come home with CDs. And one day, I think after seeing a bunch of people wear t-shirts, he came home with a couple Pantera CDs.
Nice, yeah.
And I started listening to Reinventing the Steel as well as, I think, their greatest hits. Yeah. And I'm listening to that. And 2 days later, I hear that Dimebag Darrell Abbott of Pantera was shot and killed.
Yeah.
while performing with his new band. And it's like,
Yeah.
I just got into this band.
Yeah.
And like, I'd listened to a couple songs and I'm like, yeah, I kind of like this. You know, the guy I was doing a radio show with would use Walk as our like intro.
Yeah.
And I was starting to discover this music and get into this music. And obviously at this point, Pantera was no longer a band. He had moved on.
Yeah.
He was Damage Plan, you know, and it's not like Pantera was necessarily taken away, but like I didn't get a chance to celebrate how much I was enjoying this guy's music while he was still with us. Like I had just discovered them and I was just discovering like I've heard some people recently making fun of it, but like Dimebag's guitar tone, you recognize it immediately.
Yeah.
Like there is
right
no
away.
mistaking any other band or any other guitarist for Dimebag. Like I remember listening to, it was a mix of Pantera and Superjoint Ritual on like the same mix CD I made. And I remember whoever I was listening to, they recognized that it was always Phil Anselmo.
Yeah.
But they couldn't tell which was Superjoint and which was Pantera. And I was like, listen to the guitar. Like Pantera does not sound like anyone else.
Yeah.
And that was Dimebag's tone. And like, I just felt like it was such a shame that like I got into this band and 2 days later he's gone. And like that was such a bummer. And like since then, you know, as much as I'll like to poke some fun at Pantera for their glam metal days and claim that Phil Anselmo,
we all do.
You know, Phil Anselmo stole the sound from Exhorder and introduced Pantera to it. You know, it's Pantera's first album as a glam metal band. Dimebag is 16 years old and he's playing these fantastic 1980s like heavy metal riffs at 16. He sounded great. There was so much talent there. And it's, you know, it's a shame that Pantera wasn't a band anymore at that time, but then you don't even get the opportunity for him to reunite with any of them because he's taken away from us. Yeah. And like that's such a shame that he's taken away from us in that way and that he was still creating music. It may not have been Pantera. It may not have been music that everyone liked, but he was still in the middle of touring and creating new music. And that's all music that we'll never get to hear now because he was taken from us.
Yeah. In the same way that you mentioned, you know, being able to go back and listen to an artist after they're gone, thankfully, Dimebag was just constantly recording stuff. Constantly. You know, I remember when Rebel Meets Rebel came out, and it was like, oh, here's a whole entire album that he'd done with David Allan Coe. And, like, had he passed, would this have ever been released? Like, that might have stayed locked away in a vault somewhere, and we never would have heard any of it.
Yeah.
And, like, it's so curious to think that that's a true artist. He was truly just like, I've got a bunch of these ideas. You want to come over and record all this shit?
Yeah.
And like, whether we release it or not, now he's gotten it out of his system and it's out there. And it's so funny to think. I mean, whether it's 2 days before or a full year before, like it was for me, you know, I think that is one of those losses where it's like, fuck, this guy was still out there trying to do his thing. It's not like he had left the music world and was just like, Pantera broke up, so I just decided not to do anything. He was like, no, I've got so much more music that I need to make, that I need to get out of me, that, you know, I'm going to now create this whole new thing and create, still something with his sound. But I can't imagine, like, I know he down-tuned his guitar a lot, but could you imagine fucking Dimebag playing, like, as good as he was across all 6 strings? Because I think that's, like, he was probably one of the last guitar heroes that we can speak of, you know, between him and Zach. Yeah. When you think of the old school guitar hero, I think they are like the last two. But I can't imagine what it would be like if he was like, oh, hey, Dime, take this 8 string. Like, what would he have come up with? It would have been like the grooviest, sickest sounding fucking riffs that he would have had. And there's that what if is what sucks so bad. I still remember hearing the news that, he was killed. I was on the way to school. My dad's driving me to the train, and he had like Howard Stern on or something. And yeah, they're talking about how this had happened the night before. And I'm like, what the fuck? I mean, for me, again, it was a year after I had started listening to Pantera, but that's still that same feeling of like, but I never got the opportunity to see him live. I never got the opportunity to really take a deep dive, because at that point, really all I had gotten into or like sunk my teeth into was that greatest hits album.
Yeah.
So like I still had so much more exploring and so much more learning about his career and his music to do. So yeah, it really sucks. And that the question of what if, I think is going to be a really prevalent topic.
Yeah.
Especially with this next artist that I want to mention. Their time was cut so short, so painfully short, that it's like they had so much creativity that they didn't have an opportunity to get out. Like Dimebag had a whole, like if you want to call it 3 careers, right? Glam Pantera, Pantera, and Damage Plan.
Yeah.
I'm sure that he'd be making music to this very day if he was still with us. But Dave Williams of Drowning Pool had that one album and left such an impression on people. His nickname, Stage, he got that from Dimebag.
Yeah.
Dimebag saw him playing at Ozfest and was like, yeah, he fucking takes over the stage. That's his fucking nickname. To be christened by Time himself with your stage name is like so awesome. He passed in August of 2002. So we're, it's 20 plus years now since he's left us. But I have always wondered, what would Drowning Pool have sounded like had Dave not passed away? And I think it's so telling that they had such a hit with the song Bodies, that they had such a hit with the song Tearing Away, Sinner. That album, I've talked about it before, how like it's such an injustice that they didn't get the opportunity to continue on with Dave.
Yeah.
Because I think he would have taken them to whole other levels. And this is not throwing any shade at Drowning Pool, but I think that they struggled to reach the same heights that they had with Dave as their frontman after he was gone. Because I think that they were fine afterwards, but I think he's really the special sauce that they had to them that made them stand out. And like, as you go through that first album, the lyrics are kind of simple, but it works for what the music was. It worked for that time. It worked for what the music was. So in my head, there was room to grow. There was room to grow, and there was room to experiment, and there was room to really take off running, and that we never got the opportunity to see that, to see what he would have had in store, to hear what other ideas he may have had, is such a shame. I think it really is such a shame. And the fact that, he had such a stage presence to him, that's the nickname that was bestowed upon him, is really telling. So that's, to me, is one of the more like, tragic ones.
Yeah.
Because there was very clearly so much artistry and so much potential there. And again, that question of what if, what else would we have gotten?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you already said it. I've mentioned it a couple times. It's that lost potential. It's that what else could have been if we didn't lose this person. Yeah. And I very quickly also want to make sure I mention Dimebag's brother, Vinnie Paul, who we also lost, because, I believe Vinnie Paul was also in Damage Plan, right? So I think the two of them would have continued to make music, and we would have had these Abbott brothers creating some really good metal to this day.
Oh yeah. If
they were still with both of us. So the fact that we've lost both Abbott brothers, it does feel like such a loss, and such a loss of potential of what could have been if we still had these guys around. And just like you're saying with Drowning Pool, if we didn't lose these artists, what would have happened to the band? What direction would the band have gone in? And like we even mentioned at the beginning with Cliff Burton, would Cliff Burton had stayed in the band? Would they have become a progressive band? Would he have left to create a prog metal band? You know, I think the same thing happens with Drowning Pool. Is like, what direction does the music go in if you don't, you know, lose this person?
I mean, like, you look at someone like bands like Zeppelin, bands that lost a member and then were like, no, like, that's it, we're done. Or you can't continue without this person. I think it's very common in the metal world to want to honor that fallen member by continuing and carrying on afterwards, as difficult as it may be. And I think in a way that right there is the band trying to celebrate the artist, you know, that fallen brother, is them saying like, no, they would have hated if we stopped. Yeah. Just because they're no longer here. They would have wanted us to continue. And I think, you know, you look at the recent sort of controversy that's gone on with Power Trip. I know that Riley's family in the state like wasn't too thrilled with the fact that they were deciding to carry on without him, but I think that I'm pretty sure that that's since been settled, but it's an emotionally charged thing. You know, to say like, hey, no, this was such an important part of who they were. Like, we don't want it to continue. You see the same sort of discussion happen surrounding Static X. Yeah. You know, them continuing on after Wayne Static's passing. The namesake of the band, arguably. Yeah. And the creative mind behind the band. How do you continue on without someone as iconic as Wayne Static? And like, they got the okay and like the thumbs up from the family to be like, no, put this dude in a fucking Wayne Static mask, I guess, quote unquote. But in a way, it's like I got to, knowing that the family was okay with it, I got to see Static X, which was like a lifelong dream. Yeah. And I fucking loved it. And like, I felt that energy of like everyone surrounding me was into this and like loved it and loved the opportunity to hear these songs again. And we talked about the return of Pantera and how there were so many mixed feelings around that, because it's like, is it all right to do this when arguably that special sauce is no longer there? The Abbott brothers were absolutely the special ingredient that made Pantera what it was. No shade to Phil, or Rex. Yeah. Or Zach or Charlie. But my point is that yes, it feels like a celebration of the brothers. Yes, it feels like a celebration of the music, but it's not Pantera. Yeah. The thing that I take comfort in is I don't think they're trying to be Pantera with the Abbott brothers. They are simply trying to do justice to the music and carry on. I'm glad that like had Zach come out with his approximation of Dime's tone, I would have been out. As much as I love Zach Wild, I would have absolutely been out, because play his riffs in your own style, and that's what he's doing. Play his solos in your own style, because that's what he's doing. But if we wanted to try to pretend like, oh yeah, like then it's just a tribute band. Yeah. You know, and I think in that way they would be dishonoring the memory of Vinny and Dime. Chris, who's another example that you can think of?
So another band that I thought of that has also unfortunately lost more than one member is the band Gwar. They had lost Corey Smoot, who played Flatus Maximus, their lead guitar player. Corey was actually the 6th person to play Flatus, but because
you brought that up,
but because he was the longest tenured as Flatus, out of respect to Corey, they retired the character of Flatus Maximus and introduced a new character, Pustulus Maximus, who's supposed to be like Flatus's brother. Yeah. And, you know, Corey Smoot is someone who I've talked about before. Gwar kind of changed their sound in the early 2000s. You know, they were kind of punk rock, bordering on metal, but it wasn't until the early 2000s with albums like Violence Has Arrived and War Party that they were like, no, we're a thrash metal band now. Yeah. And I'd have to imagine that Corey Smoot joining the band in, I believe, 2002 had a hand in that, where he's coming in and playing this thrash metal and
Right.
is helping to write these thrash metal songs. And so I have to imagine that him being a part of the band helped influence that. And, when he passed, the band honors him by retiring the character that he played, even though the character had been in the band the entire time and he wasn't the only person who played the character.
Yeah.
Out of honor to him for being the longest tenured and the last person to play the character, they decided to retire that character. And so that's cool to see that. Also in Gwar, they lost their lead singer, Dave Brockie, who played Odorous Arungus, which obviously you are not replacing Odorous. Dave Brockie was the only one who played Odorous for their entire career, and when he passed, they came up with new characters to be their lead singer. I think now it's like Blothar, and they reintroduced a female character, Slimenstra Hyman, I believe is her name. They've reintroduced her to the band. But yeah, Dave Brockie is like, I was reading a little bit more about him right before we started recording, and like he loved Gwar, and like Gwar meant everything to him. Yeah. And it's so sad that we lost him, and that we lost him as Odorous, because Odorous was always so entertaining and was always just so much fun to watch perform live on talk shows. I've talked about, I think it was like Sally Jesse Raphael or one of those like daytime talk shows where like he's on and like Balzac, the Jaws of Death is on, and like they're giving these interviews and like in character and being these crazy characters. I know it's the AV Club where Gwar covered Get Into My Car and Carry On My Wayward Son, and Odorous is hilarious in those videos. And like he Dave Brockie was just such a character, and he played a great character as Odorous. So obviously to honor Odorous, they're going to, retire that character as well. But it's a shame to think that we did lose these two members of this band. I'm trying to remember the timing of when I saw Gwar. I believe Corey Smoot had already passed away when I saw Gwar at the Crazy Donkey. Dave Brockie was still in the band. He was still Odorous. But I do believe by the time I saw Gwar, Pustulus was the new guitar player for Gwar. So it's kind of a shame that I didn't get to see Corey Smoot, but I did get to see Dave Brockie. And so I guess in that way, it's I'm glad that I at least had that relationship with the band and that experience with the band, that when they lost that, like I really felt that loss. Yeah. When we lost Corey and we lost Dave Brockie, because I'd been a fan of the band. I'd been a fan of watching crazy videos of Odorous, and so losing them was a huge loss for me.
I can imagine, especially because they were playing these characters. Yeah. It's sort of like you hear people talking about wrestlers who have passed, and like they are creating this whole entire persona that you get invested in and you get attached to, and you can't help but feel some sort of feel a great loss when that person passes, because that's also now this character that they created has passed, and that personality and everything. And I love the fact that they retired the characters, at least to honor them. It's almost like just hanging their jersey up in the rafters, you know what I mean? And like it shows a great deal of respect to kind of do that. I mean, for everything that people want to say about Slipknot now, at the very least, with the passing of Paul Gray and Joey Jordison, they retired their masks and their numbers. Yeah. I think it's a real shame, but I mean that's such a loaded topic. Yeah. Because they did continue forward after the passing of Paul, and again, at the very least, they they honored him by saying, like, here's a mask that you're kind of familiar with, and it sort of looks like Paul's mask. It takes influence from it, but it's not like they were just putting someone in that same mask.
Yeah.
Because in a similar way to Gwar, the mask and the persona is so attached to the individual that it would be, I think, a great disrespect if they were to move on without it. And like, unfortunately, there are a lot of times that artists are kind of disrespected in the way that they go and in what is done with their memory, and a lot of times their image. And this next example, I think, is a very unfortunate example of that, and that would be Dead of Mayhem. I think, and this is maybe a hot take, but I think that Dead gave us everything that he was meant to give us. The what if question doesn't necessarily linger for me with Dead quite as much, because it's almost as though he knew his time was limited. And you know, obviously the way he went, he had a very heavy hand in it. Yeah. But I think that he said to himself, I've done everything I need to do. I've given everything I have to give. And, you know, I think that with what we have of Mayhem's material with Dead, I think that that's exactly what he was meant to give us. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's almost like this was something that he was carrying with him that he had to get out and put into the universe, and then that was it. You know, maybe he would have gone on to form a really cool folk band or, you know, do electronic music. Yeah. You know, like another fucking Norwegian that's out there. But I think that Dead's legacy is as fucked up as that legacy is what makes him such an important figure and someone that I wanted to bring up. You know, I mean, like, Euronymous using his image is despicable, but it's also like, well, this is what you were dealing with at the time. Yeah. Like, these are the people, these are the characters that you were sort of dealing with in that scene and you know, within that genre. It was just trying to do the most shocking thing. You know, Dead was known for cutting himself on stage and, you know, burying his stage clothes in the dirt so that he'd have that smell of death and all this stuff. Like, you know, it's said that he would smell like a dead bird in a bag before heading onto stage. Yeah. And like, that was totally his whole thing. But I don't think that means that you have to like plaster that image everywhere. You know, I don't know. It's a really odd thing. Do you get what I mean? That it's like, I think he kind of gave us everything he was meant to give us.
Yeah, because I think the thing with Dead is that you can have a much deeper conversation about mental health with what was going on with Dead,
which I am not classified to do.
We are not qualified for that conversation.
That's why I was trying to stay away from that.
It is clear that there was a lot going on there, and whether it was whatever it was, I do understand what you're saying, where it kind of felt like Dead did everything that he believed he was meant to do.
Right. Yeah.
And in the way he took his life, you know, leaving a note, sorry about all the blood or whatever it was. Yeah. And then, like you're saying, the band members return to this cabin and then go out and buy a disposable camera and reposition things in the room to take pictures like they're props. And like, I don't think it's an official release that uses the picture of Dead on it. No, I do believe it's a bootleg. Yeah. But the picture got out. Yeah. So it's something that kind of adds to the mystique of Mayhem. Yeah. But yeah, it's on the one hand, you kind of think, like we've been saying, what more would Dead have had to offer to black metal? Right. If, you know, this hadn't happened. But at the same time, again, trying not to have that mental health conversation, but was he at a point where he felt, I've done everything I'm going to do. There's no more for me to do. But at the same time, they were in this cabin to write and record a new album. So it's a very strange thing. And it's again, I would imagine unintentionally, but who really knows, adds to the myth of mayhem and black metal. And, you know, it's the
mystique, the appeal,
you know, and you have a website like The Hard Times that more pokes fun at Varg. But there is a Hard Times article that does something along the lines of Mayhem tribute band kills each other. And I know one of the things is like, oh, you know, Varg really stabbed him, 27 times, and he only the tribute member only stabbed him 25 times. So I had to kill him because he's a poser. And so like it's more focused on Varg and the person he is, but there's still this, idea of who Mayhem was and what black metal is, and all of the members of Mayhem and all of the things that have happened to and with members of Mayhem adds to that. And I think part of it does start with Dead. So it's hard to tell, would there have been more music, or was everything that Dead did with Mayhem, was that him deciding, I've done everything I'm going to do. My time is up. Maybe in some ways Mayhem's time is up, and, unfortunately he left us the way he did. And it's a shame because, again, there is that what if, like, what if he'd gotten the help he needed? What if this didn't happen? What direction does Mayhem go in? What direction does his life take him? Does he continue to create music? And it's something that we'll never get to know.
I mean, I love that you bring that up. It's like, again, we are not qualified.
No, not at all.
To have the discussion on or to give advice on mental health. Absolutely not. But I think it's a very important conversation to have, that obviously, like, a lot of artists have left us in this way. A lot of artists have left us by their own hand, and it's so unfortunate, and it leaves you with that real sting of, like, what if they'd gotten, like you said, what if they've gotten the help that they needed? I mean, you look at how impactful Dead was. If you want to take one thing to say, like, without Dead, there was no Norwegian black metal, it's corpse paint.
Yeah.
He started it.
Yep.
He was the one that did it. So, like, the whole look and everything, in the way that you would have no 80s leather and studs and biker metal aesthetic without Rob Halford, you would not have, like, that corpse paint and the brooding persona without Dead.
Yep.
And I think that, although we are not qualified, as we keep saying, to have the discussion on mental health, what I think we should avoid doing as fans is prescribing, or not prescribing, but maybe putting our own weird parasocial take on who this person, this real life person was, to say that there was some deeper conspiracy at play. And I see this a lot with artists like Chris Cornell, with Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. I think it is a very dangerous road to go down to imply that there was a larger conspiracy at hand, because now you're downplaying the real struggle of people with mental health, mental health problems. I think that we should not step in to try to write something of our own to make this person seem like they were a fucking sleeper cell secret agent who was gonna take down this whole ring of predators. This was someone who was sick, who was an artist who created music that we fucking love. And the fact that they felt like that's what they had to do in order to relieve themselves of this pain and that weight that they felt is fucking tragic. We don't need to turn them into fucking John Wick for their life to have had some impact. So I would love to see less and less of that within the fandom, within, you know, the us as fans having so much access now, especially to an artist's life, having social media around where we can say like, oh, but, you know, in this post, it seemed like they were kind of off. And like, you know, why didn't they post about this thing that they went through? We have so much access to people that we have to remind ourselves that they are still people. As attached as we may be to the art that they create for us, they are still their own person. So just like, I would love it if we just all fucking drop that as a whole, as fans of music, to just not have to further like bolster the tragedy of their lives being lost by trying to ascribe it to this weird dark conspiracy that was, that you just don't know and you don't want to open your eyes up to. It's like, cut that shit out. Cut that shit right the fuck out. Yeah, Chris, anybody else that you want to bring up after I get off my soapbox here?
So someone that I feel like I have to mention is Jeff Hanneman of Slayer.
Yeah.
You know, I have mentioned multiple times I love Slayer, and Slayer was a huge part of my musical journey. And, you know, Jeff Hanneman and Kerry King wrote some phenomenal thrash metal music, and unfortunately Jeff Hanneman was taken from us. I know what had happened was he was bitten by a spider and had some flesh-eating disease on his arm, and seemed like he was starting to get better. He did play, I believe, Angel of Death at a Big Four show in California, but unfortunately the effect that the spider bite and the disease had on his arm, he wasn't able to play the way he used to, which is why Gary Holt filled in for him, you know, and continued to fill in for him. And so it was, you know, it was very sad, and it was a shame that Jeff Hanneman felt like he couldn't contribute anymore.
Right.
Which led to the drinking, which led to the liver disease, which led to his passing. And it's just such a shame because, like we've said with some of these other artists, you know, I saw Slayer on their World Painted Blood tour, which was the original four members. Jeff and Dave Lombardo were part of that lineup. I saw that tour twice, and I'm very happy that I got to see that version of Slayer live. Because those are the guys that wrote all the music that I love. Those were the guys that were in the band for those first 5 albums that I will continue to listen to over and over and over again, because I love that version of the band. And Jeff Hanneman is a huge part of that. So, you know, when he passed, I remember my brother texting me while I was at work. He's like, I don't know if you've heard, Jeff Hanneman passed away. And I go on Twitter, and everyone is posting their tributes to Jeff Hanneman. I specifically remember Slash posting something really nice about Jeff Hanneman. And I was retweeting that and retweeting all the news about it. And it was such a shame because he was such an important part of the band that was still making music, still going on tour. You know, they were still a creative band, and he was taken from us, and we don't get to hear that music anymore. And what's also interesting is that I feel like I also remember hearing that at some point, even before the spider bite, Jeff Hanneman was having trouble keeping up with the rhythm playing, and that Kerry King needed to take over Jeff's rhythm parts live because Jeff just couldn't quite keep up. He could still write phenomenal music, and he could still play his leads, but he couldn't quite keep up with the rhythm, which I believe reminds me of a story about members of Immortal. I believe the original guitar player had something in his arm that he couldn't play the tremolo picking that's required of black metal. But Abbott leaves, forms Abbott. The band is trying to reform. The dude ends up getting Tommy John surgery, and now he can play again. And so, you know,
that all it takes?
Yeah. So there's,
I'll get it right now.
And so there's, I think there's some of that thoughts, some of those thoughts for me as well, is would Jeff have gotten better? would he had been able to? Would he have been able
Right.
to work towards this? And would we have still gotten more music? And that also raises the question, because when Jeff Hanneman passes away, Tom Araya had already gone through his surgery
Right.
and was struggling with that. Would Slayer have stopped when they did if Jeff was still with us?
Right.
You know, if you had Kerry and Jeff in the band who wanted to continue, would the band have continued? Would it have continued without Tom? Would they have formed a new band without Tom, and it would be Jeff, Kerry, and Paul Bostaff forming a new band, similar to how Creed became Alter Bridge with Miles Kennedy?
Right.
Would Slayer become something else and let Tom Araya do his thing, you know, retire, rest his neck, rest his back while they bring someone else in? You know, it's...
Yo, I would have loved to have seen Kerry King and Jeff Hanneman make like Creed style music. That would have been a fucking trip.
That would have been a lot of fun. But yeah, it's you know, again, it's the same question we keep asking of what if, you know, what if
I
Jeff
think those
was
are
still with us?
the right what if questions, though.
Yeah.
Like I said before, not to get back on my soapbox, I promise. But I think those are the right type of what if questions that we can ask. I think those are the right questions to have and the right avenues to go down of like, man, what would have happened? It would have been so cool if this, you know, as opposed to going down the darker path.
yeah, absolutely. You know, I just want more music of, you know, the one of the songwriters of my all-time favorite band. Like that's what I want more of, and it's a shame that we won't get that, and it's also a shame to know, as you know, I've learned more and we've heard from Jeff Hanneman's widow, you know, how it affected him and how upset he was that he couldn't play this style of music anymore because of the spider bite and because of the disease and all of this. And so I think that's also a shame as well, that it's like, if he had treated himself with something other than alcohol, would he have gotten better? Would he have been able to continue to contribute? Because like I mention and make the comparison to Immortal, I forget the person's name, but they were still capable of writing music. Yeah, they were still capable of playing the guitar to the point that they could write a song. Yeah. But would that have been enough for Jeff Hanneman? You know, I think so much of Jeff Hanneman was that he wanted to be on stage, and it was a bit of a silly costume, but he's up there in a Raiders jersey, leather pants, and catcher's shin guards. Yeah. And like, it's, I don't know why, but like that's his thing, and that's what he did. And I just have to imagine that he wanted to be out there. Yeah. And it hurt him that he couldn't be out there. And it hurt the fans as well. I love Gary Holt. I talk about how much I love Gary Holt all the time on this podcast. Yeah. But if I'm seeing Slayer, I want to see Kerry and Jeff, because that's Slayer. Yeah. That's who Slayer is. So it's such a shame that we lost someone like Jeff, because there was clearly the band was going to continue at least for a few more years, because it did. Yeah. But you know, what more would we have gotten out of Kerry and Jeff if we didn't lose Jeff Hanneman?
Chris, like I mentioned, I wanted this episode definitely to be more of a celebration as opposed to hanging on and lingering, you know, about the way that these artists went. And I think that we accomplished that. I think that we definitely have highlighted some artists who had so much more to say and who had such great impacts. But I need one more from you. Who else do you have here for our suggestion for this week?
So my suggestion this week is Chuck Schuldiner of Death. Every once in a while, I decide to start listening to Death, and it always makes me kind of sad to think that, like, I didn't even hear of Death until years after Chuck had passed away. And I listen to this music, and it's so fucking good, and like it's such great thrash metal bordering on death metal, and he played great and he sounded great with his vocals. And
Yeah.
I always forget he's from Long Island because I think of Death as a Florida metal band, but
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
from
yeah.
Long Island. And, it's such a shame that we lost him because there was so much talent there. There was still clearly so much more he could write. I know there was a benefit for him and I believe Chuck Billy,
Yeah.
because Chuck Billy had like throat cancer or some shit.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah, I
that
remember us
was
talking about
that
that.
was the reunion of Testament. Paul Bailoff reunited with Exodus at that show. Someone else we also lost too soon in Paul Bailoff. And if he hadn't have passed away, Exodus might have recorded Tempo of the Damned with him instead of Zetro. So that's another what if. But yeah, with Chuck, it's such a shame because you have this great music with some pretty wild and violent themes, and all you hear about is what a fun-loving dude Chuck Schuldiner was, and what a great guy he was. And it's just such a bummer. So if there's a specific song I want to mention, it's probably my favorite Death song, 1,000 Eyes off of Symbolic. The song is about basically living in a surveillance state. It's a really good fucking song. I fucking love this song. Shows off everything that Chuck Schuldiner was capable of, and is, I think, a great way to celebrate the message that he was putting in his music, the style of music he was playing, the style of singing that he had. It encapsulates all the things that the band Death and Chuck Schuldiner's, songwriting contributed to the world. So that's why my suggestion is check out Death, their song 1,000 Eyes, and let's all, do our best to honor Chuck Schuldiner.
What a fucking suggestion there. That's awesome. Dude, I love watching interviews with him because he just seemed like the two don't seem to match.
Yeah.
And like there's one interview where he talks about like, he's like, yeah, no, I'm talking about like real life. I'm talking about like actual things that happen. Like, I think that death in and of itself is way scarier than any like demon or dragon or whatever. I think the quote is something along those lines. And like, he just seemed like such an intelligent guy. Like, So any opportunity I get, if I see like a cool clip of him on Instagram or something, I always take the time to watch it because he, besides being an incredible musician and songwriter, you just seemed like I would just want to sit there and listen to him talk. He just seemed to have so much to say, besides through his music. Now, at the top of the episode, I mentioned that unfortunately sometimes it does take someone's death for us to become aware of them as an artist and to become aware of their music. And at the time of recording, Eddie Sutton of the band Leeway just passed. And seeing everyone's tributes pour out over social media, and seeing YouTube videos pop up talking about who Eddie Sutton and who Leeway were made me curious because I had not heard his name. I had not heard of Leeway. And so I took the time to look into their music, and God damn it. So fucking good. It's like such good crossover thrash, and it is... You can easily hear the influence that Leeway had in their early material on a lot of the music that I love now, a lot of the music that we've talked about on this podcast. And a lot of times I have to try and push out the notion that I'm a fake fan. Because we all discover bands at whatever time, it's you're not going to discover a band at the same time as anybody else. And just because it takes an artist's death for you to look into this band and to become a fan of this band doesn't make you any less than someone who's been listening to them since that very first album dropped. So I just want to remind everyone that time is an illusion. Find these bands. You're meant to find these bands when you're meant to find them, and just appreciate the music while the artist is here. And even if it's an artist that you're only just hearing about after they've passed, that's still all right, as long as you're celebrating by listening to their music. So definitely go out and do a deep dive like I'm doing on the band Leeway in remembrance of Eddie Sutton. before we go, and we've brought this up before on the podcast, but if you find yourself struggling, if you see any signs, and sometimes there's no signs, but whatever, check up on your friends, check up on yourself, take care of yourselves. And with that, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Scrap Metal Podcast. The time has come for us to pack up our gear, but we'll be here to rock out with you in the next episode.
Stay metal, everyone.
Good night.